Hello folks, my name is Thom. I'm an English teacher, I'm the host of the Well Teacher podcast, and I'm the author of 3 books with John Catt Educational. The first is Slow Teaching, the second A Quiet Education, and the book that I've written over lockdown is called Teacher Resilience, and it's out in October. I guess at the core of most of my kind of writing and thinking about an education is really about how we can create the conditions to best help teachers to thrive and ultimately be the best version of themselves. And as I said, I guess the reality of that is because I would probably describe myself as a fairly ultimately a fairly anxious person, and one of my challenges, I guess, is as being a person and as a teacher is finding the best ways to function with that kind of stress and anxiety. And so, as I say, I sat down to write Teacher Resilience over the lockdown and to look at the ways in which we can best kind of manage those feelings of stress and anxiety. And it was a fascinating process, and I learned a huge amount from it. And what I'd like to share today is 5 of those key ways in which I believe can help teachers to manage those feelings. And what I want to make really, really clear from the start is this isn't a silver bullet. We're never going to rid ourselves magically of feelings of stress and anxiety. Ultimately, we work in a stressful profession, and we need that stress and that anxiety in many ways because it's what fuels us. It's what in many ways makes our teaching so energizing and so exciting for young people. And ultimately, through the sort of span of humanity, we've needed stress. It's an essential part of our makeup. The negative side, I guess, comes from when that stress and anxiety is skewed out of proportion, and it takes away all pleasure from our professional roles. And again, what I want to stress is this isn't about systematic change. Of course, I completely recognise and appreciate there are some toxic, terrible environments in which the conditions assist and create further stress and anxiety for teachers. But I also think as teachers we're autonomous. We have control, ultimately, over how we behave and act professionally and how we manage our health. So what I want to look at are 5 different areas, mindset areas in particular, that will help us to balance and hopefully, as in the year ahead, find less stress and anxiety. So, those 5 things. The first I'm going to talk about is having a core sense of purpose. I'm not sure what I was going for with that hand. I think possibly it was the hand of help. Anyway, first is about having a core sense of purpose. The second is about tackling the inner narrator that we all fall foul to sometimes. The third is that very, very cheesy expression. I'm not a big fan of it. This concept of self-care. The 4th is about finding moments of gratitude. And the 5th is about reflection. So I hope you find some sort of useful elements to it. I guess ultimately, the last few months, one of the reasons why they've been so destabilising for teachers, and if I talk from a personal point of view, is really that sense of our core purpose has in many ways been removed. We can't do what we've trained so hard to do and what we ultimately love, which is standing up in front of a group of young people, inspiring them, energizing them, and helping them to develop, I guess, intellectually and as young people. And I think while moving back into the school environment comes with obviously a great deal of kind of uncertainty and anxiety, this is the thing that's really exciting. This is an opportunity for us to get back to that core sense of purpose. And people who are ultimately more resilient and can cope with setbacks are people who have this purpose at the forefront of their mind. That sense of I guess ultimately a calling, a belief that they are striving and working towards, and that sustains itself no matter what sort of setbacks and knocks might come on that way. And I think for us as teachers, to cope with the many degrees of stress and anxiety that we experience on a weekly and daily basis, this long sense of purpose of what we are doing and why we are doing it is absolutely core for us to hold on to, because it will sustain us in the long term. And what are we there for? As I said, ultimately we are there to do the very, very best we can for young people. And everything else that happens in between that is in many ways extraneous. We are there, and our core purpose is something that we need to sustain and hold on to. The second thing that I think is very challenging for teachers is that often we have a perfectionist mindset, and it's absolutely with the very, very best of intentions. We want to do the best we can, but being a perfectionist in the classroom is a recipe for burnout and a recipe for exhaustion. And in many ways we can be our own worst enemies. And a lot of that is oblivious to the people we work with or the young people in front of us. It's a kind of ringing inner critic that is continuously critiquing and evaluating what we are doing. And again, it's a natural process through evolution. The negativity bias is something that was really, really important, obviously, for our cave-dwelling ancestors. But now, with all the incredible stimulus that's everywhere in the world, it's something that has the potential to really leave us kind of drowning in feelings of anxiety. So, how do we go about challenging that inner critic? The first thing I would argue is that we have to ultimately approach our inner monologue with the same compassion and understanding we try to aim for the young people who are in front of us. Because that's what we do. We're teachers. We care for our students. We look after them. We nurture them. We try and encourage them to be the best version of ourselves. Whereas often what we're doing internally is anything but that. And we can't really control the nature of that inner monologue because it's trained over a huge amount of time. But what we can do instead is take a little step back from it and be a bit more dispassionate about the critique that we're giving ourselves. And we can replace that voice of negativity with that sense of understanding, instead of just castigizing ourselves and being really, really negative. We can think and plan proactively for doing things differently the next time. And it takes a huge amount of training and cultivating. But eventually, if we keep thinking of ourselves in that more kind of compassionate and understanding manner, and forgiving ourselves for the mistakes we'd make in the same way we forgive kind of colleagues who we're working alongside for their mistakes, we start to feel a little bit more optimistic and buoyed about the work we're doing, rather than finding ourselves repeating the same patterns of negativity. So one way we can do that, I guess, is by writing, by reflecting and writing on our experience throughout the day, because it requires a certain amount of intellectual detachment from that kind of voice that will repeatedly be negative. Okay, the third thing. And this is where things get a little bit cheesy. And if you type self-care into Google, this is what comes up. And this is what the perception is of self-care. This idea of settling down with a cat. And ultimately, it's kind of escaping from the world. Whereas I think this, for teachers, this concept of self-care is absolutely fundamental to longevity in the profession. Because there is this concept of martyrdom that as teachers, we have to put our young people first. We're kind of slaves to their success, and we have to work endless hours in order to facilitate that success. We have to run intervention sessions, we have to mark every evening, we have to do this, and this. And again, cultures in schools exploit that and kind of present these martyrdom teachers as kind of heroes of the profession, when in reality what they are doing is completely burning out young teachers and resulting in them leaving the profession. So I would argue one of the most important things in this sort of self-care philosophy is having boundaries. It's having patterns that you stick to and ways of working that you dictate, that aren't dictated by anybody else, but that work for your circumstances. And that is profoundly different for different people. You might arrive in school early and you might leave when the bell goes. It doesn't really matter. But it's about you being in control. And it's about you not allowing yourself to every evening be working. Because as I said, that is just a recipe for dissatisfaction. We all need that time to step away professionally in order to be the best version the next day for the young people in front of us. Because it's almost a cliche, but it's so true that we are the very, very best resource for the young people in front of us. And if we're an exhausted shell of our former selves, we're not going to be any use to them and for them. Ultimately, other ways in which that self-care philosophy has to run through are your kind of well-being essentials, the basics. Eating well, sleep, prioritising sleep. Mary Maya talked about this in her brilliant presentation for this festival, but recognising that marking 4 more books or getting another hour's sleep, considering priorities and prioritising sleep at every corner. Because we all know that feelings of stress, anxiety are elevated hugely when we haven't slept well. And we all know that feeling on a Friday of collapsing after a week in which we haven't rested and haven't been restorative in the way we need to. And again, I absolutely don't want to be patronising about this because it works so differently for different people. This concept of well-being and self-care is a profoundly personal one. And for some people, for me, it's doing lots and lots of running to school and back. That's my kind of method of leaving the day behind me. Whereas for other people, it's bird watching, it's anything that can take you outside of the school environment and can be something that is yours and nobody else's. And again, in terms of our teaching, young people don't want to be taught by somebody who lives and breathes their life in a school. They want real, living, breathing human beings who have a variety of interests that they can bring to the classroom and a variety of ways of living. I mean, that's what's really, really interesting. But if we do anything in the year ahead, it is, I guess, ultimately that self-care, prioritising how we want to work and looking after ourselves. I think the final thing I might add to that is also the capacity to say no. Because I don't think as teachers we are the best at that, at drawing a line in the sand and saying, I appreciate you asking me, but this isn't something I'm going to become involved in this year, or I'm afraid I have too much on at the moment. I mean, how often do we say that as teachers? And we have to be able to do that, because in any other profession you would. And to not fall for any rationale that tries to make us feel guilty about doing that, but being firm and consistent about it. So that's number 3, self-care. Number 4 is this concept of gratitude. And I was reminded of this really quite powerfully today, because in Scotland we've been back at school now for a few weeks. And I passed one of my colleagues, I'm recording this on a Friday night, I passed one of my colleagues at break time today, and he said, "How are you?" And I launched into a bit of a moan about my little boy's lack of sleep and the fact he'd been awake all night. And I said, "How are you?" And he said, "Well, I'm just really grateful to be here, and I'm grateful to be," he said, "I'm grateful to be working. I'm grateful to be here and to be teaching young people after the time we've had." And I guess it really made me kind of walk away and think, because it was really, really easy for me to go straight into the negatives. And again, we've talked about it already, but this concept of the negativity bias means that those negative emotions and those negative reflections are much louder and more resonant in our minds. And we repeat the same patterns of negativity, and they become stronger and stronger and stronger. But recent research into neuroplasticity has shown that we have the capacity to move away from that. And we have the capacity to strengthen other aspects of our mind. And gratitude is one of the ways in which we can do that, because it lights up all of the really positive things that exist for us. And professionally, as teachers, there isn't a day that goes by where there isn't those light bulb moments. And they can vary. And that's the brilliant thing about it. They can be a child's response that was incredibly thought-provoking. It can be a conversation with a colleague. It can be recognising the strengths that colleagues around us have, that we can learn from and develop from. They're always there. And of course there will be challenges within that, and there will be feelings of stress, there will be feelings of anxiety that exist and are coupled alongside that. But actually making that process explicit, making the process of gratitude explicit over time, makes us feel much more positive. And my first blog, when I first started a blog about 4 years ago, was called Teacher Gratitude. And I was going through a particularly difficult time, I guess, with my own sort of mental health and things. I just left a really quite toxic environment. And I was struggling in many ways going back into a school. And what I did is every single week, I found something to write about that correlated and linked with the idea of gratitude and expressing gratitude with someone. And of course, absolutely nobody read it at all, but it did slowly over time make me feel so much better about what I was doing in the classroom and what I was doing in the school environment. Because you start to look for things to feel grateful for and to recognise and to value in what you're doing in the classroom. So it doesn't have to be starting a blog, it can be anything. It can be just taking the time to sit down and write for 60 seconds at the end of the day. 3 or 4 things, boom, that you feel grateful for, that you feel positive about, that you feel good about. And they can be tiny, they can be minuscule, they can be anything. But doing it every single day builds up that gratitude habit. And then you start to move that into your relationship with people around you. You start to signal it to young people. You start to signal it to colleagues around you. You thank them for things. And it becomes a really powerful philosophy and way of kind of being. I mean, I'm lucky enough in the school I work in now in Edinburgh that the head teacher does every Friday at break a kind of gratitude moment where she says thank you to the teachers, to teachers or people in the school who've done particular things throughout the week. And it's a lovely way to close off the week that just leaves everybody feeling that little bit better. And those negative feelings, those feelings of anxiety, those feelings of stress, they start to feel less pervasive and strong in the face of that positivity. That's number 4, gratitude. I think feelings of stress and feelings of anxiety often feel stronger when we feel like we are stuck and we're in patterns of behaviour that we can't get ourselves out of. And that might be in our classroom. We might feel stuck in particular ways and unable to get ourselves out of them. So one of the ways in which we can channel that in terms of a mindset is this mindset of reflection. It's this mindset of continual growth and learning and development, and seeing ourselves not as this notion of an outstanding practitioner, but seeing ourselves as a developing practitioner, always, no matter how long we've been in the classroom, because there will always be ways to hone and improve our practice. And if we can embrace that mindset of growth and development, we start to lose the perfectionist strand that runs through a lot of the things we do in education. And yes, we have a lot of responsibility, but no human being is perfect. So one of the ways in which we can start the year positively is by proactively looking for those ways in which we can grow over the year. And there's all kinds of ways we can do that. I mean, we're really lucky in the sense of the richness of CPD that is out there. Everything podcasts, books, these kind of videos and things. I've been lucky enough to bring people together this week and record for me for this festival to reflect and develop and grow more on. And then, in a school environment, we're lucky enough that we work alongside people. If we open up those classroom doors, if we let people into our classrooms, if we find coaches, if we find people that we can work alongside, if we always see ourselves not as perfectionists, but we see ourselves as building and learning, we're less likely to feel so anxious and so tight about this desire to do things as well as we can. And again, that notion of collaboration is so important in this, and in challenging feelings of stress and anxiety in any environment. And I guess part of that idea of growth is about emotional openness. It's about, if we are feeling that particular way, it's about seeking out the colleagues, the people alongside us that can help us and that we can speak to. Who are the people in your school environment who listen and will help you to kind of work your way through those feelings of stress? Because the worst thing we can do is hide ourselves away and get in that tunnel vision mentality of negativity. So in terms of reflection, as I say, again, it might be a particular thing you want to hone and improve and really, really get kind of obsessed about improving through the course of the year. It could be questioning, it could be behaviour management, it could be relationships, it could be anything, but anything that makes us feel like we're on a stepping stone to development and improvement, I think really helps us to feel less anxious and stressed about our professional work. So finally, I think the poem Invictus, Nelson Mandela's, favourite poem, an incredibly inspiring poem. I think for me, the final 2 lines of this are so important for us as teachers to remember, and it is a little bit cheesy, but give me this, to remember in the kind of academic year ahead. We ultimately are the masters of our fate and the captains of our professional souls. We're autonomous, in the kind of stoical philosophy of being ultimately in charge of our own professional destinies. And we can make the decisions and be proactive and doing all the things that will stop us to feel as anxious and as stressed out about what we do throughout the course of the week. And hopefully, some of the things I've talked about today might prove helpful in doing that. And also, my new book, Teacher Resilience, which is all about kind of different mindsets, different actions, different ways in which teachers can manage stress and anxiety and kind of thrive and achieve the best they can in the classroom, will be out in October. And hopefully there's lots in there that might, again, help to keep that positive lens and help to see teaching as a profession in which we can sustain ourselves for a long, long period of time in. So thank you very much for listening, and I really do wish you all the best for a really positive, really happy, really successful academic year ahead. Thank you very much.